Okay, this will be my fourth and final philosophy live stream for the day. I just had a lot of notes that I had taken for videos that I've been wanting to do for a while. I'm getting some of those done so I can move on to more stuff. Some of my main projects, including The Difference in Repetition by Gilles, Being in Time by Heidegger. I got a couple other ones going too. So I haven't done any videos on this one yet, so I'm gonna introduce this one. This is by Deleuze, translated by Paul Patton. I'm going to be discussing the introduction here. Now this is kind of some heavy stuff. It's not heavy. It's not like it's just like it's. If you haven't read something by Derrida or Foucault or something else by Deleuze, if you're not used to like post-structuralist philosophy, then this might be a little bit difficult, because he uses words that are kind of familiar to people of the English language, like difference, generality, repetition, that kind of thing. But it's referring to concepts that are sort of hard to elucidate, and I'm going to do my best. So this is the intro, and I have a good few pages of notes on this, and then we'll ask two questions that he has posed, that Deleuze poses as we go into this. I did a bunch of stuff on Deleuze's A Thousand Plateaus. I did a couple things on Deleuze's Capitalism and Schizophrenia, the Anti-Oedipus. But I haven't done anything else by him for a while, so I'm going to try and get into this one. I've read parts of this one before, but not all of it. So I'm going to try and I have a good hold on some of this stuff, if that's possible. If we're talking about Deleuze, Derrida, Foucault, having a hold on their concepts isn't something that you really want to say, because you would catch yourself in a lie. But to have a brief understanding of what he's saying is all you really need, because the thing is that to understand it is sort of to miss the point. To try to really to attempt to understand Derrida, Deleuze, or Foucault in the same way that you would try to understand Shakespeare, it's not gonna work. It's just not. It's a different kind of content, different kind of thing here. So, difference and repetition. So he talks about repetition and generality and how they must be distinguished. Science is only of the general. Repetition and resemblance are different in kind. Resemblance is something more akin to what Foucault talks about in his book The Order of Things. In The Order of Things, he goes over, like, Foucault is just different. He goes over art, history, philosophy, all these different kinds of topics, but he's talking about resemblance in a similar sort of way, if that makes sense. Deleuze is vastly different, but there's the concepts of difference versus resemblance, difference in Deleuze and resemblance in Foucault are just, they're very, very similar concepts, but they're very, very different in the same way. So, what is generality? So he's going to try to clarify how repetition and resemblance versus generality are very, very different. Generality has two major orders: the qualitative order of resemblance and the quantitative order of equivalences. And there's an exchange or a substitution of particulars, which defines conduct in relation to generality. Empiricism. Empiricism, there's general ideas as particular in themselves. Each can be replaced with any other particular idea it resembles in relation to a given word. So with resemblance or generality, with resemblance, that's kind of, if we're talking about empiricism, and we're kind of like X is same as Y. We can substitute, we can replace, that kind of thing. This is different. What is the domain for resemblance or equivalence? There's an economic difference between generality and repetition. To repeat is to behave in a certain manner, but in relation to something unique or single, with no equal or equivalent. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. It does make sense to me, but it's in a more empirical, sort of analytic philosophy kind of way. It doesn't. So there's a paradox of festivals here. They repeat an unrepeatable. Another one right there. Repetition interiorizes and reverses itself. Generality of the particular stands opposed to repetition as universality of the singular. Repetition can always be represented as extreme resemblance or perfect equivalence. If repetition is possible, it's due to miracle rather than law. Repetition is found in nature, is the name of a power which affirms itself against the law, not with. So he's kind of trying to set some of the concepts of Deleuze's philosophy, against empiricist stuff, against any sort of thing having to do with the law, or universal natural law, or whatever like that. He's trying to set himself apart here, and that's what this introduction is about in this book. Repetition expresses singularity opposed to the general. Repetition is a transgression. It puts law under question, denouncing nominal or general character, favoring a more profound, more artistic reality, questioning relationship between law and repetition. Natural phenomena are produced in a free state where any inference is possible among the vast cycles of resemblance. Everything reacts on everything else, and everything resembles everything else. There is no reason to question the application of mathematics to physics, as physics is already mathematical, since closed environments or chosen factors constitute systems of geometrical coordinates. Phenomena necessarily appear as equal in those closed environments or chosen factors in certain quantitative relations, while repetition only appears here in passage from one order of generality to another. Resemblances are unpacked to discover an order of resemblance. So it's sort of, we have, I think, this is a conceptual schema that I think he's trying to lay out here, that we have layers of a very artistic, complex reality where there are repetitions of the unrepeatable. There are things that are happening where we're in between repetitions and orders of generality, you have things that are different from one repetition to another. Repetition refers to a singular power which differs from generality, even when it takes advantage of artificial passages from one order of generality to another. This is kind of like Foucault, like I said again, where we have iteration and reiteration and resemblances, where Foucault, in the beginning of Ordering Things, does discuss kind of an iterating, reiterating a resemblances of how everything is connected and how we have a very artistic, conceptual reality. Expecting repetition from law of nature is the Stoic error, and this is finding a law making expedition possible. So we have the moralists, which says that God holds out the moral sphere, the possibility of repetitions, which or successful repetitions, or the spirituality of repetitions, because it depends not on the law of nature but on the law of duty. So the moralists are kind of like people who are philosophers who were kind of about God. They're about law of nature. And it makes me think of Hobbes, because Hobbes talked about a law of nature where there's no real morality in people because the state of nature, or the law of nature, is a very chaotic thing. Where we have representing passions or pleasures being a demonic and damned exercise, ending up in despair or boredom. So the moralists have sort of a polar sort of setup. Kant, however, forms a moral law as what can in principle be reproduced, and this is sort of a test repetition. Conscience supposes moral laws to be extinct. That is a ambiguity. Generality has a habit of is sort of a second nature. We have a form of habit, a habit of acquiring habits, which is essentially moral, or the form of the good, in the order of resemblance, or a order of equivalence. Repetition is as much opposed to moral law as to natural law, and we have the overturning of the moral law. We have irony, and we have humor. Irony being the art of principles, how irony, basically what the idea of irony is, and humor being the art of consequences and dissents. So here he talks about three people. We have a triptych of people which he kind of touches on and sort of uses as a jumping off point. I said that 3 times in 3 different videos today, I think. We have Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and I think he was this third one I don't know much about. His name is Pegui. I don't know a whole lot about him. He's a French psychologist, I think. Where where each one looks at repetition, and they look at it in a sort of a different way, as pathos and pathology, but also fundamental category for a philosophy of the future. He does say that a lot, that repetition is the fundamental category of the philosophy of the future. Kierkegaard says that Kierkegaard opposes repetition for all forms of generality. Kierkegaard has also a test repetition where we make something new of it by making it making it superior to the will. Nietzsche, on the other hand, makes repetition the object of willing, by liberating it of what binds it. So they each have a way of looking at what repetition is, and they kind of also sort of oppose law. They oppose repetition to certain laws of nature, where they might oppose repetition to moral law, and in particulars of memory, or they oppose repetition to generalities of habit, where repetition appears as the logos of the solitary and the singular, That's kind of a more bigger concept. Memory receives particulars dissolved in generality. Repetition is thought of the future, and the whole idea of the memory or the moralism or the laws of nature is sort of against this whole idea of repetition that he's sort of bringing about. And these three people, the Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and this other fellow that I don't really know a whole lot about. He's kind of making an example of what they did with repetition, whereas what he's going to really do with it to make it really something, which is repetition being the thought of the future, as opposed to the ancient category of reminiscence. Again, not memory. We are not supposed to have particulars of memory here. And against the modern category of habitus. Repetition is where forgetting becomes a positive power, while the unconscious becomes positive. He also discusses Freud and the psychoanalysis of Freud. And we have what I think something he has here is we have process philosophy, or metaphysics in action, the overcoming of philosophy via movement. He discusses theater. Theater is the real movement, and it extracts real movement from all arts and employs. Theater is repetition, and repetition and generality are opposed from the point of view of conduct and the point of view of law. It remains the speaking third opposition from the point of view of concepts or representation. Self-consciousness and recognition appears as the faculty of the future, or of the function of the future, or the function of the new. Just kind of going over some of these things just to get them out of the way, so I can come back to one main point that he makes in the end. The discrete, the alienated, and the repressed are three cases of natural blockage of the idea of repetition, corresponding respectively to nominal concepts, concept of nature and concept of freedom. All three are where sameness of representation or conceptual identity is invoked to account for repetition. But repetition is distinct, but it still is strictly the same concept, even though repetition does more. Repetition appears as difference, but difference absolutely without concepts. It is indifferent difference. So the words really, strictly, absolutely, that's kind of where the idea of natural blockage. Now, natural blockage is sort of his kind of way of talking about how we can stop, how certain thinkers stop repetition from having its full potential of being the philosophy of the new or the future. As long as we invoke the absolute conceptual identity, we suggest a purely negative exploration, an exploration by default. Psychoanalysis. We repeat because we repress. Freud was never satisfied with such a negative schema, and repression explained by amnesia. And that's kind of what he did. Repression is sort of the psychoanalytic concept of having something horrible happen to you, where you repress it, you bring it into you, and the unconscious is sort of this mythical thing that Freud talked about that I think is kind of weird at times, that is a part of you that you can't get to, that explains your behavior. And repression is explained by amnesia, by simply forgetting. It's a negative way of looking at forgetting, while Deleuze is trying to turn forgetting, taking out reminiscence and memory, making that a positive thing. So, masks and costumes. They do not come over as an above, but they are internal genetic elements of repetition itself. Repetition is truly that which disguises itself and constituting itself. Does that make sense? That which constitutes itself by disguising itself, and masks only hide other masks. So we have a very complex reality he's building before he really goes into it. No first term. There's no first term that is repeated. There's no finite thing here. There's no finite reality. It's very infinite. It's very complex. It's very artistic. It's very, 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 very beautiful, this thing that he's making. Repetition is in its essence symbolic. Symbols or simulacra are the letter of repetition itself. Difference is included. Variations do not come from without. I repress and forget because I repeat. Now, if you can't see like this from reading, if you read Deleuze and if you can't see like this really complex, infinite, beautiful, artistic reality that he's spinning like a spider almost, it's kind of like I don't know how to explain how to understand it better, but that's kind of what's happening. Problem of the essence of repetition. It's a question of knowing why. Repetition cannot be explained by a form of identity and concepts or representations. Repetition demands a superior positive principle, possibility of a cause of having less symmetry than the effect. So, Claude Lévi-Strauss, who was a structuralist, he talked about cause and effect symmetry, where we have what causes it and what happens. There's a symmetry there, where with repetition, the possibility of a cause having less symmetry than the effect, we have a lack of symmetry here. Is it the identity of a nominal concept which explains repetition of a word? We must distinguish between discrete elements, these repeated objects, and a secret subject of repetition. Repetition is pronomial, and it is to find the self of repetition. Repetition is difference without concept. Why/how could a concept be naturally blocked, and how can it have no interior? How can there be no self of it? How can there be no center? How can there be no start? How can there not be one first term that is repeated? There are internal differences which dramatize an idea before representing an object. There are repetitions which aren't only extrinsic differences, just as there are internal differences, neither conceptual nor intrinsic. We have to identify the source of these ambiguities. We have to find the essence of repetition. This is a big question that we have. So, going down to these two questions that we're going to have going forward in this book. First one: what is the concept of difference? Not reducible to a single conceptual difference, but it demands an idea. What is the essence of repetition? Not reducible to difference without concept, and bears witness to singularity as a power of ideas. So that's where we get this book coming. Difference and repetition, result of interferences and intersection between these two lines, and with these questions, and that's kind of how we get these ambiguities and this very beautiful reality that he has made. He's thought of it as a better way of going about philosophy and bringing philosophy to a more moving, active state. So, let me know if I messed anything up. If you're a Deleuze expert, you want to discuss it, or if you have questions or whatever, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to discuss this with you. Thank you very much for watching this live stream.